Welcome everyone to today's webinar. The next in our series, Transparency is the New Green in Product Selection and Specification. Today it's all about EPDs, everything you always wanted to know, but were afraid to ask. And we went with that title because most people don't even know what questions to ask about EPDs because they are so complicated. This will be the first in our series where we break down the process for how EPDs get created and start looking at the tools that can be created moving forward in the future to make environmental product declarations, or as you'll learn going forward, type 3 environmental declarations, much more useful for making informed decisions about products for the built environment. So in today's webinar, we're going to look at the current state of EPDs and how they've kind of stayed the same for the last 6 or 7 years. I'm going to talk about sustainable mines. For those of you who don't know us and the work that we've been doing, we'll talk generally about the role of the program operator and how ISO 14025 is the technical standard that prescribes how these technical programs operate. We're going to look a little bit deeper into 14025 that contains the requirements for content that goes into EPDs. And then we'll take a look at how Sustainable Mines has evolved our solutions over time in concert with ISO 14025, but to really look at the intent of that standard to ultimately create preference for higher performing products. We're going to look at why specify products with EPDs, why it's a good thing to do now, and some conclusions we can draw today. And we'll look at what's going to be coming down the road. And again, this is the first in a series of educational webinars about EPDs. We will make the deck available to you after the webinar is over. We're also recording it. That will be made available. Any questions that you ask during the webinar, we'll answer at the end, or we'll follow up with you after the webinar. And there is a poll when you exit the webinar, a few questions that will help us out with our ongoing research. And any feedback or additional questions that you'd like to leave at that time, there's the opportunity to do that as well. So let's start out. What's going on with EPDs? How did they become so important? And why should they be considered to be important? And the reason is because EPDs are based on a life cycle assessment, which should be done to provide a manufacturer visibility into the life cycle impacts of their products. That means from raw material acquisition, part manufacture, product manufacture, use phase, distribution, end of life, and you've certainly got transportation and distribution between all of those stages. That's the purpose of doing an LCA, is to let a manufacturer know where in the life cycle of my products are the greatest impacts occurring. But doing LCAs and then EPDs are super complicated for a manufacturer. They're complex, they're risky in terms of disclosing information. They're super expensive to produce. But again, they are the tool to identify where in the life cycle impacts are occurring that then give the opportunity to the manufacturer to identify new strategies to apply in those life cycle stages to mitigate those impacts, to drive improvement and usually innovation through thinking about the choices that they make today and changing them up to make new improved products for the future. Now, manufacturers typically are not suited to doing their own LCAs, certainly from the start. So they'll typically engage a consultant or a consulting firm to get them going. And the best case is that they get trained ultimately to operationalize and make those processes internal, so it simply becomes part of the way they make products. But when they get started, they're led through the EPD process by LCA providers and ultimately program operators who are all technical standards people. And the result is that today's EPDs generally still don't deliver understandable and meaningful information for non-technical users like architects, builders, contractors to make informed decisions about products. And the reason is because the information that could be in an environmental product declaration that would help make the technical information understandable is optional in ISO 14025. So because it's optional, it rarely gets considered to be added to that document for the purpose of making it more useful. So what's happening is that EPDs continue to be kind of a check the box activity. That's great. That's a great way to start. That's a great motivator. You have to specify the right number of products with EPDs to earn the credit. But we're increasingly hearing that manufacturers are growing skeptical of spending the time, the money, the risk. And this is literally a quote that a manufacturer that we're working with now heard from an architecture firm that they called on that said, yeah, we ask for EPDs, but we don't read them. We just put them in the file. And that's not a very good motivator for a manufacturer to spend the time and the money to make this information available. So this is why it's super important to specify products from manufacturers who have created EPDs. The first point is, if the industry's intent is to reduce the environmental impacts of the built environment on the natural environment and human health, manufacturers must use life cycle assessment to understand how to reduce the impacts of their products. They have to do it. That's the tool. But if manufacturers believe the market is only going to ask for that to check a box and they don't win business, they're going to stop doing LCA and ultimately producing EPDs. And that rewarding building owners with green building rating system credits ultimately is not going to be enough of an incentive longer term. So the market must demand products that actually do have better environmental performance and not just a document to check a box. We should be asking manufacturers to be continually improving their products, and they should be able to explain, and their spec reps should be able to explain when they call on firms to do lunch and learns what they're actually doing to improve the environmental performance of their products and be able to correlate that, as somebody might like, to better understand what the LCA results mean. This should simply become part of the way manufacturers' reps get trained to talk about the manufacturer's products. This is required of them for any other aspect of their product: functional performance, safety, cost. These are all attributes that people use to make decisions. Manufacturers' representatives should be able to talk about the environmental performance and ultimately the material health attributes of their products and be able to use the technical disclosures to support those stories about what they're doing. So we want to support every manufacturer who has gotten started creating EPDs. That's a big, huge investment. And now we want to encourage them to continue to make better, greener, higher performing products. Encourage them, hold their feet to the fire, make them explain what they're actually doing to improve. And that is how collectively as an industry, we're going to drive change. So with that context and that preamble, I'm going to dive into our story for today, which is, what's up with EPDs if you're not able to use them to make better informed decisions, it's really not on you, it's on us. And when I say it's on us, I'm talking about organizations who have decided to become program operators who follow the ISO 14025 standard, which lays out the principles and procedures for developing Type 3 environmental declarations, which are also known as EPDs. And so in North America, there are 9 program operators, organizations who operate as program operators. And there's different kinds of organizations who have opted to do that. The predominant type of organization who have added program operation to their business are standards developers. You see ASTM, CSA, NSF, UL, SCS. But notice there's also NRMCA, an industry association. Sustainable Minds, we're a software company. FP Innovations, a research organization. And the point is that ISO 14025 has no requirements about the type of organization that can be or run a technical program. There are only requirements about how the program gets run. So to become a program operator, an organization must publish a governance document and make that governance document public on their website for anybody to then access and download and read about how they run their program. So number one, if you're looking at different program operators and how they operate, go find their governance document. You may not be able to find the governance document for every program operator, but go take a look because that's one of the requirements. We're going to look at today and over time the EPDs that are produced by the different program operators, but today we're going to give you some insight into how they're similar and how they're different and why. So a little bit about Sustainable Minds. I think we uniquely stand out from that list. We're a provider of environmental product transparency, cloud applications and services. Our very first product that we brought to market 10 years ago is a streamlined eco-design and LCA tool for product manufacturers to use in early stage concept development. So this is all kinds of mechanical products, not just building products, to be able to measure and model the environmental impacts across the life cycle, look for where the greatest impacts are occurring, and apply eco-design strategies using a framework to those life cycle stages to try to generate new product concepts, competing concepts that not only are more innovative, but can reduce the impacts, deliver new solutions, and improve that product's, that manufacturer's competitive advantage in the industry. So Sustainable Minds has been in the business of LCA and eco-design, which is also referred to as life cycle thinking, since the inception of the company over 10 years ago. So we actually have this idea that you can see in this donut diagram here, that making greener products really is a continuous improvement loop. And a manufacturer can start wherever they like. They can start in design and actually use LCA to evaluate products, understand where there are impacts, make different decisions, manufacture, and deliver a higher performing product. And then they can start to create public-facing technical reports like EPDs, or alternatively, they could start by producing EPDs, which means doing an LCA and creating this public-facing document, and then taking what they've learned from that LCA and driving it back into product development. So when that happens, there is the opportunity for continuous improvement or continual improvement. Big manufacturing companies, it's not easy to make infrastructure changes, or potentially easier to make supply chain choices. But it is challenging to make big changes. But knowledge is power, and where there are impacts, there's waste and there's costs. So every time a manufacturer does an LCA, there really are opportunities to make some kind of improvement that's going to help out the manufacturer as well as contribute to better performance results in the LCA. So with that understanding, when LEED version 4 was introduced in 2012 by the USGBC, with product transparency really as the cornerstone, and I'm going to paraphrase here, essentially the intent was, look, we know that a building is just a compilation of products, and if we're going to make higher performing, greener and healthier buildings, then we actually need to use standardized scientific methods across all product groups or product categories to measure the environmental performance and material health, so that ultimately comparative decisions can be made and those metrics can be added up. So everybody has to do it the same way instead of having different kinds of criteria for different product groups and different ways of measuring. And so I'm going to show you when we got started in 2013, why we got started focused on creating what we call a transparency report. It is a type 3 environmental declaration, meaning it is an EPD. Why we felt it was important to start with that deliverable, that market-facing document, and then go back from that learning, become a program operator, publish our governance document, make a lot of changes to the way we run our program. We were the first to introduce a 2-part PCR for North America. We wrote the technical program from the ground up for North America. A lot of other innovations. We'll touch on that a little bit later. And then continued to look at how do we take the technical information in an LCA, and then in 2015, we started looking at material ingredient disclosures. How do we provide a manufacturer a vehicle to tell those stories about what they've learned from doing those technical disclosures and what a user who's making a decision about products, what they should know about what's been disclosed in those technical studies? What does that technical data mean? Where are improvements being made? Explain the manufacturing process. Explain material substitutions. All of the things that actually can show that a manufacturer themselves understands the technical information and really is using it to drive meaningful change in their products. And so every year we continue to look at making, we started out with focusing on making things understandable and meaningful. And then we started working on developing standards and standardization of how information is delivered and engaging the industry in delivering things in a standardized way. And then in 2016, we introduced the Transparency Catalog to begin to help the industry see how many manufacturers actually have invested in product transparency of any type, make it simple to find. And since 2017, continuing to work on now making those investments by those manufacturers, making product transparency actionable, meaning helping their sales representatives learn about product transparency, learn about how to use that information in their interactions day to day with customers, and further making it possible for architects, engineers, builders, contractors themselves to take action on selecting and specifying products from manufacturers who have invested in transparency. So going back to sustainable mines, because some of you probably are going, well, all right, I don't really understand how you fit in this landscape. We kind of break it down like this. We're a little like other software companies that make LCA tools, and we're a little like those technical standards organizations who are also program operators. We do LCA project delivery, but largely we do LCA project delivery as part of our R&D to continue to understand what manufacturers need to do to invest in product transparency and ultimately report, and also to inform our technical program, which we update every year. We don't do verification of any type. We don't do LCA verification, and we don't do EPD or transparency report verification. Our goal is actually to be the provider of simplified and standardized and useful tools that any manufacturer, independent of which program operator they work with, can choose to have a transparency report. That's our brand of EPD versus a traditional EPD that's a PDF with lots of technical data. In either case, manufacturers now have a choice. And we want to make it easy for manufacturers and every other program operator to give a manufacturer a choice about creating better tools. So our modus operandi is to collaborate with every provider of LCA services, material health, disclosure services, as well as program operators and verifiers. Now, we act as industry analysts, essentially. We track the industry, every program operator, every material ingredient rating system and disclosure program. Every month, we add to the transparency catalog every manufacturer who's done something. Again, because we want the industry to see there are many manufacturers across many CSI master format divisions who have invested in transparency. And at this point in time, there really are enough manufacturers across enough divisions that a pretty substantive portion of a building can be specified. The products that are specified can be products that have transparency disclosures. So at the end of 2017, and we'll do this again at the end of 2018, we produced a trend report and looked at, in this case, you're seeing the data, the total number of EPDs that had been created and that were currently valid from all the North American program operators. It turned out there were EPDs in 19 CSI divisions, and it's kind of not surprising that there's more activity in concrete and in finishes. Concrete requires EPDs for every mix, so there's many of those. And finishes is a pretty broad category. You've got flooring and paints and coatings, and you can see there's actually a correlation. There's 12 PCRs. There were 12 PCRs at the end of 2017 for products in the 0900 division, which generated 454 EPDs from 159 manufacturers. So that's a pretty active division. But it's still pretty interesting to look to see, how many PCRs existed. And in the next webinar, we're actually going to look at the 0700 division. We're looking at how many PCRs there are relative to a lower number of EPDs. And we're going to look at just that slice because those PCRs are from a mix of program operators. It's not just from one. And so we're going to take a look at how those PCRs are different and how those EPDs are different, even though they're for fairly similar products. And that's a pretty interesting look. So just to level set, let's take a look at 14025 and what 14025 says. This is the Bible for how to do EPDs. Ultimately, it's how do program operators operate, how do PCRs get created, and how do EPDs get created. So here's the foreword, And I pull out this content from the foreword because the intent of 14025 is quite clear. It says different technical programs are encouraged to share and harmonize in order to meet the principle of comparability. Mutual recognition is encouraged, and ultimately, it's laying out a set of expectations that, people really should be thinking about doing things in a similar way, for the reason to deliver information in a way that is meaningful to the intended audience. So it says it twice. Consider the information needs of different purchasers or user groups and pay due attention to the level of awareness. I don't think it could be more clear in terms of saying, consider who you're talking to, make this information understandable and meaningful, because the overall intent is to encourage the demand for and supply of those products that actually do cause less stress on the environment through communicating accurate information that's not misleading. And there's a kind of a bulleted list of here's how you do it. And it does make the distinction, and I'm going to make this clear too. Here it talks about to meet the principle of comparability, people should be able to make comparative decisions using EPDs, but with a very clear warning to manufacturers that EPDs cannot be used to make comparative assertions, meaning that a manufacturer can't use the results of the LCA to say, look at my results compared to that manufacturer's results and see how much better my products are. And the reason is because LCA is, while it is a very specific technical process, it has a very large amount of assumptions and estimates that go into it, to the degree that the results of any LCA could be, and I'm going to use the word accurate in air quotes because you never use the word accurate when you talk about LCAs, but it could be, within a range of plus or minus 20%. And so people follow the PCR. We're going to talk about what's in it again, but nonetheless, manufacturers cannot make comparative assertions. And unfortunately, people using EPDs to make comparative decisions, it's very difficult to use the characterized LCA results to make those decisions. So if you can't use the characterized results to really make those decisions, then what else are you going to use if the EPD doesn't have any other information about what's the manufacturer doing to improve? What do those results mean? Where are the impacts? Where is the manufacturer going to be going as a result of this knowledge? So when we got started back in 2013, when the USGBC said, hey, specify products with EPDs, my own background, I was a graphic designer many years ago, and so I didn't really know what an EPD was, even though we were in the LCA business. That isn't the kind of LCA tool we were delivering. So I said, well, it's an EPD is a brochure. As a graphic designer, I think about brochures. So what makes them so special? So we did a big research study. We collected about 40 different EPDs largely from Europe and some from North America. And we even selected some documents that were being used in lieu of an actual EPD to see what was included in that kind of document. And so I'm going to show you these 5 to illustrate some of the key findings that we extracted from that study. So And again, here, this was interesting to us. When we did this study, every EPD has a disclaimer like this. This is, from 2013, again, that warns you that you can't use the EPD to make comparative assertions and how to use the results. So every EPD has that disclaimer. So the way that we did our analysis of what was in those EPDs that I was calling brochures, we went back to ISO 14025, where it describes pretty explicitly the content requirements for what goes into the thing to be able to call it an EPD. So it can't be an EPD by definition if it doesn't include these 4 categories, and it must be, LCA must be independently verified by a third party, and the end result, that final document, also needs to be verified. So those are the requirements. There's content that's required and a two-step verification process. So there's 4 main categories of information: LCA results, whatever's relevant in terms of variation that drives performance. So if there's different manufacturing facilities, that's being included in the LCA, that needs to be included in the EPD as well. Other environmental information could be material information. It could be, other stuff. That's pretty general. And then the last part is whatever else the manufacturer wants to tell about the product, as long as it's relevant. And relevant is described essentially as anything that's related to the product and any environmental stories that you'd want to tell. So what we did was we broke it down a little bit further, and we created a little color coding key. And we went in, and by the way, this is required, that's required, that's required. Number 4 and number 5 are optional, right? So anything that would tell the stories, optional, and this is required because this is the credentials of the verifiers. So remember, teal and orange, optional. So what we did was we went into each of those EPDs and we color-coded the content to see how much of which types of content was in each EPD. Now remember, so here's this early Armstrong ceiling tile. This was a Cadillac of EPDs. It had so much content and diagrams, and it was amazing. And notice there's a good amount of teal, not so much orange, but a fair balance. This next one was a Hans Grohe hand shower from Germany. It was over 40 pages. Notice no orange, or there's a little bit of teal on the very last page, and tons of LCA results, just page after page of tabular data. At the time, UL was producing a transparency brief, which was a 2-sided page. And my understanding was that idea was a result of knowing that EPDs were too long. And so a brief was created, but then the brief was neither an EPD and now and nor could the brief be accepted for the lead credit. And so now the manufacturer had 2 documents they needed to manage. And then finally, we did look at one EPD down here from Rockphone out of the Netherlands, and it actually was 3 pages. Now, it didn't have any orange, but it had a little bit of teal, but it was 3 pages, and it actually was an EPD. And so we said, look, EPDs are, for the most part, they're too long, and they're not really that useful to make a purchase decision. The ones that are too short, for the most part, aren't EPDs, except for that one exception that we found. For the most part, they were too technical. There was too much detail in the LCA results. And if there was other environmental data, it was confusing in the way that it was sitting alongside the LCA results, and there really wasn't any marketing info. And when I say marketing info, I mean there just wasn't much information about the product itself, the functional performance of the product, how it would be used, just the stuff you would expect in a marketing brochure about a product. And if there was marketing information, again, there was so much technical information, the marketing information tended to be buried or in the back. And of course, they're not comparable. So we came away from this study saying, wow, how does an architect, builder, or contractor use these to make a purchase decision? And so our conclusions at that time were, one, the current PCR EPD process was in such a state, in the way that it was delivered in 2013, that it could never keep up with the demand for product transparency that USGBC was hoping to instigate. There was just never going to be enough PCRs for manufacturers across all CSI divisions to be able to produce EPDs. So, what does that mean? Well, with the increased demand for transparency, needs to be an increased effort to make complex information clear. As a program operator, we decided, if we're going to get people to actually report and create meaningful reports, then we have to be able to provide real advantages to how to report over how things are done today. So meaning make it less expensive, make it faster, make better tools in the end, build a process that allows us to continually learn, and us meaning the people in our ecosystem who participate in our technical program, and to stay focused on the benefits that the solution provides to all the stakeholders. So again, the reason that we started with the EPD, our transparency report, before we became program operators, is that the PCR and the LCA are just the means to an end. They are all in service of creating the report. That's what architects, engineers, contractors, building owners are looking for. They're looking for that report that helps them make better informed decisions about a brand, a manufacturer. Do I like that manufacturer? Do I like the way they make products? Do I feel that they really are making an effort? And now I'm also going to have information about what they're doing to improve. At the end of the day, the LCA results, the actual characterized results, are not going to be understood by the vast majority of people. It's chemistry. It's chemical engineering. It's chemistry. So unless that information can be made to be understandable and meaningful, we're going to continue to have EPDs that serve the purpose of getting a box checked, that cost manufacturers a whole bunch of money, and that don't really excite or engage the market in encouraging manufacturers to make better products. Now, the reason I took you through this early research is that we did this study again over the summer. And in the next webinar, I'm going to show you some outtakes of that. That's what the look at the 0700 division is going to be. There has been very little change. I'm sorry to tell you that. There's been very little change in the way EPDs get created and get published. And that's because ISO 14025 has not changed. And the content that is optional, that would tell those stories about what the results mean, is still optional. So if you think about it, the LCA provider is a technical person. They know how to do LCAs. The best LCA providers are also the ones who will provide the consultative service of working with the manufacturer to interpret those results and help them consider strategies of how to improve. But again, we have found that many of the LCAs that get done for the purpose of EPDs are very light on the interpretation section of that LCA report, because that LCA is being done for the intent to publish an EPD and not necessarily to improve the products. So because there isn't a lot of interpretation of the LCA in the LCA report, that doesn't even get a chance to show up in the EPD. And of course, the program operator who is running a technical program according to 14025, they're technical, the LCA people are technical, they love their technical data. They're not in the business of helping manufacturers take that technical information and turn it into compelling market-facing stories. So what it means is that the marketing people in a manufacturing company have to engage in this process, and they have to understand what these technical disclosures mean so they can participate now in creating that optional content that would go into an EPD. So Sustainable Minds, since we did that study in 2013, our ongoing research has always been to look at how much LCA content should be required in an EPD. ISO 21930, which is the latest technical standard for LCA and environmental reporting from ISO from Europe, has a lot of LCA data requirements, and so it's a requirement in Europe. We did integrate ISO 21930 into the 2018 version of our technical program, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how we did that. But we always ask when we're working on a PCR, when is full compliance with a European standard going to be required? And when is it not going to be required? Because if it's not required, then all of the LCA tabular results do not need to be in the EPD. I'm going to show you a little bit of what we're talking about too, because for those of you who are familiar with EPDs, and there's a number of you who are on the webinar, 21930 calls for reporting the LCA results by disaggregated information modules within each lifecycle stage. So if you're talking about 7 to 10 impact categories per information module, that is pages and pages of data. And who is that meaningful to? And how is somebody going to use that to make an informed decision? I mean, early on, we asked the question, if an EPD is a report of the full LCA report, which has every reason to be 50, 75, 100, 150 pages long, if in fact you're doing a big product line, multiple manufacturing facilities, all that stuff needs to be in the report. But if an EPD is a report of a report, we ask the question, then why are they so long? You can get the full LCA. It is a requirement of 14025 that the manufacturer provide a public LCA document. It certainly can be redacted. The manufacturer can eliminate proprietary information. But if somebody really wanted to geek out and get all that data, they can get it in the LCA report. So, why is it in the EPD? And there's a whole bunch of other, trickle down effects. If these technical requirements continue to get increasingly complex in the delivery of LCAs and then in the reporting, and there's variability between program operators and across technical programs, then it's just complicated for people delivering those LCAs, and even further for manufacturers who have taken up the mantle of training or delivering the capability internally to do LCA for the right reasons. It's just this ongoing challenge to keep up with the standards and be 100% compliant. So there's just a lot of technical information, and again, what that is time, and time equals money. So, nothing's getting any cheaper as long as we continue to require all the technical information to be in every disclosure that gets created. So at the end of that technical research program, we created our transparency report. It's 3 pages, and page 3 is optional. And everything somebody would want to know about the product is on page 1, and it's delivered in the cloud. So, taking the long view, when you deliver content in the cloud, it means that now we're preparing data and content to be utilized in ways beyond this initial purpose, to be able to help provide that information in ways that make it easier to make better informed decisions. And I point out that people were initially kind of mad at us for calling our Type 3 environmental declaration something other than an EPD. But right here in the foreword of 14025, it says program operators can call their Type 3 environmental declarations anything they want. And notice EPD isn't even one of the examples that they give. So EPD is a colloquialism. We called ours a transparency report. We have had to say, yay, that's our brand of EPD. But we called it a transparency report because we wanted to indicate that it was different, that there was going to be more information than what you would typically find in a traditional EPD. And we are going to be able to include other types of information, other environmental information, like material ingredient disclosure information and those stories. And so this is the standard transparency report. It's 3 pages. Again, page 1 has product images, a description, a performance dashboard, functional information, environmental performance information, links back to the manufacturer's website, links to the master guide specification, so you get right to the specs. Here's all of the verification information. You don't need multiple pages for that. Page 2 has all the LCA results that are required by 14025 for the document to be a Type 3 environmental declaration. And here on the right is the interpretation. What's causing the greatest impacts? And finally, what's the manufacturer doing to improve? We provide some visual information, which life cycle stages were included, what do those look like for the manufacturer, and then in caption form, what's causing greater than 20% of the impacts in each life cycle stage. So anybody can read that, simple to understand. And then page 3, which is optional, are any and all stories that the manufacturer can tell in any life cycle stage where they're doing something contributing to the performance improvement of their products, which we talk about here. This is where they can tell more stories. And because this is part of the Type 3 environmental declaration, this page is also verified. So you can see NSF's logo, they verified this transparency report is on every page, which means the manufacturer actually has to provide documentation to support each claim. So it's visual, it's 3 pages, it's in the cloud. There is a downloadable PDF. But what's interesting now is that we've heard in the last even just 6 months a lot of interest in circularity. The term circularity intending to focus in on what are the things a manufacturer is doing that's contributing to a better end-of-life story than just landfill. But circularity is really a category of eco-design strategies that can be with a whole list of sub-strategies like biomimicry, more recycled content. There's a whole bunch of sub-strategies under circularity as a strategy in each life cycle stage that a manufacturer can be exploring to then drive improvement. So those circularity stories can be told right here in this page 3, in each life cycle stage. What's the manufacturer doing to improve? The other topic that's become pretty popular recently is looking at embodied carbon. So today, embodied carbon is reported in every EPD, and it's this result. It's the global warming potential score is the embodied carbon score. So could the manufacturer be telling a more meaningful story about the global warming potential score and the interpretation of embodied carbon? Absolutely. These two things are the things that people are asking for. That's why it's become, people are writing articles and going to other webinars. But the fact is, this is all content that can be in an EPD. You just have to ask for it. And that's where you're going to find it. You don't need different reports. You just need an LCA provider, a manufacturer, and a program operator who will accommodate and make a place for this content in their technical disclosures. So we've created a standardized template that can be branded for every manufacturer, but the template is the same, which means we've thought long and hard about how people consume information and users. And so if they're going to make comparative decisions, they want to be able to look at a variety of reports and not have to dig through them to find the information that they want to compare. So this is the template for page 2. On the left side is always the technical information, again, required by 14025, the scope of the LCA, some of the data attributes, the reporting period, the summary of material ingredients. The right side is the interpretation of the results of the LCA, where are the greatest impacts, what's causing them. There's some sensitivity analysis, and here's where the manufacturer can actually start talking about what they're doing to improve. Here's the LCA data and results section. And at the bottom, we link to all the references, the full yet redacted LCA, a link to the PCR, also links to the rating systems that are going to reward product transparency. And I'm just going to jump ahead. When we became a program operator, we saw there was a real need, particularly here in North America, where there are so many program operators, to have a single place where people could find, is there a PCR for products in my division? And so Sustainable Minds maintains the North American PCR catalog. We update it once or twice a month, so it is always current. It's organized by CSI master format. And you can see, again, in the next webinar, we're going to be looking at these different PCRs for products in the 0700 and the EPDs they produce. In the last 5 minutes, what I want to share with you guys is a quick look into our technical program. We became a program operator so that specifically the type of EPD, the type of Type 3 environmental declaration that we're talking about, that provides for relevant additional information and relevant product manufacturing and strategy, is part of the technical program. And so this is Appendix C in our Part A, that is the content requirements for a transparency report, which is an EPD. And you can see we continued to use that very same color coding that we used in the original analysis. And so this lists each piece of content that needs to be in the EPD or transparency report. So now, again, if you think about data and digital data, we're thinking about pieces of content that that support the requirements for what needs to be in the document. But we also have this guidance, what must that content communicate to be successful or good. So we've even written some guidance about that. And we've been super, super rigorous about the LCA information that gets included in a transparency report must pass the test of how to understand the environmental impacts the product is creating and how the manufacturer is making the product better. If that information does not contribute to that understanding, then we don't add it to the transparency report. So after we became a program operator and documented all of that and how to create a Part B, which is the portion that is specific to the product group, we then turned our attention to, look, any program operator should be able to offer their clients, their customers, a transparency report versus a standard, long form PDF, if you will. And we said, and they should be able to make a transparency report from any PCR, not just a PCR created in our technical program, where the requirements for what goes into a transparency report are called out. So what we did was we created this idea of a compatibility appendix. So what a compatibility appendix does is it, again, liberates manufacturers from having only one option for an EPD, and it enables us to use any existing PCR to create a transparency report, and for the manufacturer to optionally choose to be 100% compliant with other international standards, and to ensure that the LCA rules and the report content are the same to any other EPD, only the format is different. And what we didn't want to do was water down the utility of the 3-page transparency report. So literally a compatibility appendix we've taken that Part A, and all we do is we compare our content requirements by content type as required by 14025. We compare the content requirements to the PCR or other international standards and identify what does that PCR call for in addition to what we have as standard in our Appendix C and in our Part A. And so what we decided to do was all the additional content required by any other PCR or any other technical standard, we would put on a new page called page 4. So, okay, it's 4 pages now instead of 3 pages, and they're web pages, so they're long. So we get to call it 1 page. But I'm going to show you how much additional content other PCRs call for that don't contribute to making the information understandable or meaningful to what a manufacturer is doing to improve. So here's a case study. This is from, I think, 2015. Yep, that's what the slide says. TOTO wanted to do EPDs for their lavatory sinks. UL had done a PCR using EBOOs. Actually, UL got EBOOs, the German PCR, for sanitary ceramics, and put that out through their program. And so we used that to create the transparency report for TOTO. And here's the compatibility appendix. We went through, and notice here this column is called additional content requirements from that particular PCR, and we actually provide explanation or excerpts from the PCR as needed so that we knew exactly what was being called for. And here's the result. So here's the 3 pages, page 1, page 2, page 3 for this transparency report. We added the material health overview. where we take any material ingredient disclosure program. You can see this is a tab. The user can toggle between the LCA results and the material ingredient results. It's the same format. Technical information on the left, interpretation, what they're doing to improve on the right. But notice all the additional content that made up page 4. That's a lot of additional content. And so then we went back, and because UL was using a European PCR pretty much at that point, we went through and tried to understand where is all that additional content coming from. And so on this is all page 4. Notice we color-coded. These requirements for these scenarios came from EN 15804, as well as these parameters and these disaggregated impact categories. These requirements came from ULE, was, I think, published year 2 of their technical program. And then this option in pink showed what EN 15804 was called for from both. And we actually did another one where we added 21930. Oh, there it is. Yeah. And here's the additional stuff to be compliant with 21930. And so all of that was required for this particular PCR. So with that, I'm going to stop here. Like I said, we have a whole series we're going to be doing. We'll walk through our new benchmarking guidance and the goal for manufacturers and industry organizations to establish product group benchmarks to which product-specific EPDs can be compared. The guidance is very comprehensive, and the template for the comparative transparency report calls for not just tabular data, not just that data down here, but again, interpretation. What is the manufacturer doing? How did they get better results than the industry benchmark? If there are results for several impact categories that are not as good, why? So to provide that information. And really, at the end of the day, the intent is to educate the industry about why you should be rewarding manufacturers who are investing in product transparency, and in this case, EPDs, because they're putting a lot of effort into it. So as an industry, we want to reward them. We want to encourage them to keep doing more. And that means you got to specify their products. But you also have to get their sales reps to be able to talk about environmental performance as a performance criteria, just like everything else they need to know about and be able to talk about. So we announced last week the next release of the transparency catalog that's going to come out in early December. We have actually identified and will have added every single every single EPD in North America. It's over 1,200 EPDs that will be available through the transparency catalog, and you can imagine where we're going with that. So thank you for coming. Please, if you have time, take the survey on the way out, and we will definitely follow up with you if you've left a question. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a great day.